Hi, I'm Tamara, and welcome to today's CCUA Kitchen Side Chat. Today we are going to be talking about bad apples, and I'm putting that in quotes because this is actually a perfectly good apple. It just has some bad spots on it. But as I think we've all heard the saying, one bad apple makes the batch go bad. So I think a lot of people, myself included, would typically see an apple like this and maybe throw it into the compost. So today we're just going to talk about all about how maybe an apple has a lot of bad spots. Maybe it's soft, maybe it's a little milly, but that we can still use these to create delicious dishes. So we're going to dive right in today. Okay, so no matter where we buy apples, sometimes, especially this time of year, when we have a lot of apples and maybe we're buying too many of them or we're getting too many at the central pantry, somebody gives us apples, maybe if we don't use them too quickly or we store them in the wrong ways, they can start to go bad. Sometimes if I even get one from the store, it can have a spot, or like I'll drop it on the floor or whatever. So we definitely don't want to throw this away though, and we don't want to compost this because we can totally still use it. So today we're going to start kind of talking about different things you can do with bad apples. So let's see. So a lot of ideas that I kind of searched on the internet to make with like apples that are milly or older would be like an applesauce, an apple butter, an apple puree, which are all things that I've done before. I've also made like apple pie filling with apples that are on their last leg, apple crisp, apple cobbler, apple oatmeal with like a steel cut oatmeal, make kind of like this little apple filling that you can put in there. What's nice about apples too is they have this natural sweetness to them. So we don't necessarily have to use sugar, which is always good. I feel like honestly, if you use the right kind of apples, you totally don't need sugar in any of these recipes. So let's see. Other things were like an apple zucchini muffin, which a lot of people are still getting zucchinis or squash out of their gardens. So this is a good opportunity to use those as well. And then this one I thought was really interesting. It said that you can add apples to stews and to things like they pair really well with things like kale and carrots and things like that. You can do almost in like a roast. And talked about using like apples and making like kind of like an apple pie filling or a compote and using that with pork and things like that, which I also did not think of. So these are all great ways. So the first thing we're going to do is we're always going to wash our apples, and then we are going to go to town with our knife and kind of cut all of these bad spots off. So if you'd like to peel your apples, you can, depending on what you're going to use them for. So today I'm going to go through 3 ways to save your apples, and that would be to freeze them, how to freeze them, what you need to do in the process, how long they last, to make homemade unsweetened apple sauce in your crock pot, Instapot, or on your stove. It's so easy, and I think a lot of people just think like, oh, I don't have time to make my own applesauce. That's crazy. Especially it's great for kids, toddlers, adults. You can make an apple puree and you can put it in things. What's nice about all of these items is like applesauce, apple butter, apple puree, they all freeze really well. So if you have a ton of apples and you're able to just cut them up really fast and either do this freezing method I'm going to talk about or make your butter in like your crock pot overnight, mash it up. You can use a hand masher, you can use a blender, you can use a food processor. The hand mashers actually work really well because once you cook these apples down for like 8 to 10 hours, they're like super mashy. So again, you can peel them if you want. You can not peel them if you want to leave the peel in. I personally like a peel on there when I'm making like an applesauce or an apple butter. But I will say if you're going to hand mash your apples or use like a mortar and pestle or something like that, I would take the peel off because I feel like it can be a little grimy. If you have a child or somebody in your family that's real weird about textures, again, I would take the peel off. So this little guy, I just washed him. Beautiful apple, just has a few imperfections. So we're gonna go ahead, and what I normally do is I start by cutting the apple in half to see how far the damage is. So the damage is not so bad on this guy. As you can see on this side, it doesn't go that far in. So we won't be wasting much apple, which is great. So I'm gonna go ahead and hopefully you can see this a little bit closer to you. And I'm gonna just cut off these bad spots and throw them into my little bowl for composting. And again, like just kind of see how far the damage goes. Some spots are going to be easier if you just cut them out real fast. This can be a really fast process. Obviously cut the core out. You can use an apple core if you want. You can just hand cut them out like I'm doing here. And it really can be a pretty fast process. You know, take the seeds, put those in the compost. Again, so I've cut this apple down and I can see that we've got the spots are going a little bit lower than I would like. So I'm actually just going to cut those out. Do a little surgery here. Perfect. Perfect. And that's good to go. So then depending on what you're going to do with it, you could cube it, slice it. I'm actually going to show y'all how to slice these, and I left the peel on. And then we're going to freeze them. So I'll kind of show you that process. But again, like with this, that apple didn't look great, but when we cut into it, we realize it's actually not bad at all. So we don't want to give a bad apple a bad rap, you know what I'm saying? So I'm going to cut out like the peel and everything. And honestly, you could do this pretty quickly too. You can use one of those apple peeler or apple cutters, the slicers that have kind of the different things. You could use one of those as well. So my apple is like ready to go. So this is just as good as if it wasn't a bad apple. So I'm going to take all these slices and kind of show you. So if you're going to go in the process of freezing your apples, it's so easy. There's just one little step that I think a lot of people forget about. So you're going to take about a quart of cold water and a tablespoon of lemon juice. I just use this from the bottle. You're going to mix it. Sorry, I forgot a fork. Kind of blend it up really well. And this is like really crucial. So when you're going to cut these apples up, let's say I have a bunch of apples and they have bad spots, but I'm going to freeze them because I want to maybe make something later. I just don't have time to make it now. I wanted to do these as slices. You could do cubes, you could do whatever you want to do. But if you want to do this, you're going to take those apple slices with the lemon and the water and kind of mill them around for a minute. And then you are going to take your cookie sheet and fish out all those little slices or cubes or whatever you have and put them on the cookie sheet individually. And we're going to do what I call a flash bake or a flash freeze. So we're going to throw them in the freezer for like an hour or so until they get pretty hard. And then we're going to take those and put them in a bag, an airtight container, a mason jar, whatever. And we are going to then freeze those that way. So once you do this process, you can freeze them for up to 6 months in the bag. And then again, you could use that for anything you want. So then you have all these frozen apples in a bag and you can use these for cobblers. If you want to make applesauce later, if you want to make like an apple puree later, if you wanted to make stuffed apples and apple pie, any of that, you could totally use these frozen apples. So that's how they look. And then we're just going to throw this in the freezer. We're going to check it in about an hour. What you want to see is you want to see the apples really frozen and like a pretty solid, so they're not going to stick together in the bag. And then we are going to stick all of those in like a bag or container and we're going to freeze them in the freezer. So I'm going to set these over there. Okay, so the next step, we've talked all about apples, how to cut off the bad spots. So we're done with that. So here are my little apples. So the next thing is if we were going to make an apple sauce or an apple butter, what's really cool about it is I think people think apple butter is super complicated, but applesauce and apple butter, there's only one little difference, actually two. Most apple butters that you purchase at the store or you purchase, someone gives you as a gift, they typically have sugar in them. And they typically have a lot of sugar in them. So I personally have made apple butter for the last few years, and I give it to people as gifts. We eat it here on like an English muffin, or it could be good on vanilla ice cream, that kind of thing. But what I do is I never put sugar in it, and I think it tastes great. So kind of like this simple recipe, and I'm going to drop this recipe below, along with a couple of pictures of the process of making the apple butter / applesauce, is you're going to use 1 pound of any kind of apples. Typically they say to do like a sweet and a little sour, but honestly with this, use anything you have. If you have a bunch of apples with bad spots, use those. And so again, you're going to chop those up, take the core out, take like any of the top stuff out, any of that nasty stuff, chop them up really quickly. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. And you're going to throw them all into either a crock pot or an Instapot or a pot for your stove. Throw them all in there. And if you're doing a crock pot or stove pot, you're going to do a 1/2 cup of water, throw it in there. If you're doing an Instapot, you're going to do 1 cup of water. And then at the end, after it's all done, if you want to make an applesauce, after you have cooked it and you have mashed it up either by hand or with like a blender, you are going to then take 1 teaspoon of lemon juice, and after it's blended on only applesauce, you're going to pour that over there and mix it in. The reason why we do this is because it keeps the color and it keeps the taste and everything, and it keeps it looking better longer. Especially if you're going to freeze it, this is really important because I feel like the color and the wateriness, the lemon just kind of keeps it looking and feeling really fresh. So with apple butter though, which is what I'm making, I did not put lemon. I've never put lemon in it. I've heard that you could. That's like the only difference between these two other than the sugar. And then with apple butter, I personally put a lot more seasoning than I do if I'm making an apple sauce. We'll go through the seasonings here in a minute as well. And the other difference is once I blend this up, and we're going to do that here in a minute, you're actually going to take this and blend it up. And then at that point, if you're making an applesauce, you're done. You can put it in the fridge, serve it to your family. You could freeze it, serve it to your family later, make little popsicles for the kids, you're done. But if you want to make an apple butter, this is where you take that beautiful blended apple butter and you stick it back in the crock pot or the stovetop or whatever, and you're going to give it a second cook. And the reason why that is because you want it to be caramelized and get that really deep flavor. I also put way more seasoning. So let's see. So the seasonings that you can do are typically cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, apple pie seasoning, pumpkin pie seasoning, anything like that. So what I did is I did a teaspoon of cinnamon, a teaspoon of clove, a teaspoon of nutmeg, and then I'm a little wild and I went with a teaspoon of pumpkin spice seasoning, which is basically all of those plus like 1 more. So I'm going to show you this. So this has been crock potted this, and this is apple butter, but again, very similar to applesauce. I crock potted this for 8 hours yesterday, and so I want to show you the beautiful color. And those are my apples, and like before, they were just these sad looking apples, and we turned them into this delicious, and it smells so good. I wish you could smell it. So what I'm going to do is I want to show you kind of how you do this process. So all I did was cut my apples up, throw water in there, and then cook them in my crock pot. So now we're going to take all of that beautiful, delicious kind of apples. And again, I left my peels on there and like you can barely see. Like, it smells so good. But then I'm going to just show you kind of the next step of the process. So after we cook those apples in any way that you see fit, and I'm going to put those below with cooking in Instapot, crock pot, or stovetop. Then we are going to take that mixture and we're going to either hand mash it, throw it in a blender, throw it in a food processor, or if you're real fancy and you have an immersion blender, you can use one of those right in here. So I'm going to use a blender and kind of show you how easy this is. And again, I've chosen to do this as an apple butter, but if you want to do an apple sauce, this would be like last step and then you would be completely done and ready to eat it. So I'm going to pour this in here real quick and give it a blend. So it might be kind of loud. Okay, and I also wanted to point out too, let's say that you have this kind of chunky apples that have been cooked and they have the cinnamon, and I didn't put any sugar in them again, but I put all these delicious seasonings. If you wanted to, you could go ahead and put this in a mason jar and use it for apple filling or apple cobbler. You could even eat it like this, like chunky style applesauce. Like it's totally ready to be eaten. And I'm actually gonna hold a little bit of it because I love the cooked apple flavor, and I'm actually gonna eat a little bit of that for lunch. So we're not going to do the whole thing just yet. Okay, so real fast, I'm going to be really loud, but I'm going to blend this up and kind of show you the consistency that you're going to be looking for if you want an applesauce or apple butter. Again, you get to pick. If you like a chunky applesauce with the peels and like big chunks of apple, you could totally stop here and not blend it. If you could do it with like like a potato masher, you could do that. If you like it really silky smooth, you could do one of these. Or you could do like a potato, one of those hand potato mincers that like shoots it out like really super fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and blend this up really fast. So that's done. So here's the difference. And you're gonna see this got a little bit more watery than I would have liked. But again, since this is an apple butter, I'm gonna take this mixture and I'm gonna put it back in my crock pot and cook it for another 2 hours. And the reason why the color is so dark is honestly because of how many seasonings I put in. I put cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, and I put a lot. So there's the apple butter. If you wanted to do sauce, again, this is the point where you just go ahead, put it in an airtight container and store it in the fridge or freezer. I did want to point out, if you're going to put it in the freezer in like a mason jar, make sure you leave a nice big bit of room at the top of that mason jar so that you don't have it break in the middle of freezing it. That would be really bad. So it's just it's not fun. I've had it happen before when I put a little bit too much in the mason jar. But yeah, this is literally it. There's your beautiful homemade applesauce. And then again, I'm just going to cook it again for a homemade apple butter. You could use this as a puree. If you have a baby at home, this could be a homemade applesauce or a homemade applesauce for your baby. You could add in other things. Let's say you want to puree, sweet potatoes and carrots and things like that. You could do the same thing in a crock pot or whatever. It would be the same kind of process. Depending on what kind of vegetable or fruit it is, it depends on what seasonings you would add. But yeah, that's it. I'm going to put all the information below. But yeah, that's it. So I hope that you have a new appreciation for bad apples and that you realize that we definitely don't need to compost these guys, but we can do lots of cool stuff with them. So I did want to mention, we have a survey that we're doing for our kitchen side chats, our garden side chats, and our gardening workshops that we wanted to see if you would take about 5 minutes to fill out for us. I will put the link below as well. And so if you could fill that out for us, we're actually going to enter you to win a CCUA gift basket. So we really appreciate it. We really just need your feedback. And yeah, but happy Friday, and I'll see you next week.